The sun hadn't even broken the horizon when Lena Whitmore swung her boot over the saddle and clicked her tongue. Her horse, Maverick, groaned like it knew something she didn't. The morning air was dry, bone dry, like the desert was holding its breath. A windmill squealed in the distance. The rest of the world slept. Sage County was cattle country, nothing fancy, just cracked dirt, open skies, and silence that settled in your bones. But Lena liked it that way. She didn't come here for noise. After the divorce, the foreclosure, and what happened with her father, she needed the silence, and the land. It was the one damn thing that still felt like hers. She adjusted the worn leather reins with one gloved hand, and looked back at the ranch house. Windows dark, porch light flickering. The cattle had already begun to stir behind the fence, restless and hungry. Just like every other morning, she whispered, "Let's move," and kicked Maverick gently into motion. Lena Whitmore wasn't born into ranching. She clawed her way into it, married into it, fought tooth and nail to keep it when her husband, Jake, ran off with a barrel racer from Amarillo and left her with a half-broke ranch and a mountain of debt. She didn't cry, not then. She just picked up a shovel, a rifle, and started working. Like hell, folks in Sage County either admired her or avoided her. She was too independent for their liking. Too direct, too good at what men around here thought only men should be doing. And she'd made enemies. A rancher 2 plots over once accused her of cutting his fence line. Another swore she spooked his herd. But the worst was the preacher. Reverend Grady had called her a danger to Christian men during a Sunday sermon, just because she told his wife she deserved better. But Lena, she didn't give a damn about gossip. She had work, she had animals, she had scars that didn't need explaining. That morning, she was moving a group of calves to a far pasture, closer to the canyon's edge. The dry season had left the central fields barren. The grass out by the rocks had held on just a little longer. It was a longer ride, almost 3 hours out, but she'd done it before. What she hadn't done before was leave her phone on the kitchen table. The cattle shifted around her, kicking up dust as they moved along the narrow trail that wound past skeletal trees and thorny brush. The sun had finally risen low, gold and angry. Sweat beaded on her neck. Maverick's hooves made soft thuds against the dry ground. Birds circled overhead in the silence. At one point, she stopped near an old fence post twisted by time and leaned down in the saddle, scanning the horizon. Far in the distance, heat shimmered above the canyon. That was where she was headed. That was where she vanished. "You don't spook easy, do you?" she said aloud, patting Maverick's flank. The horse didn't respond, just kept walking. Looked back once more, toward the ranch house. Gonna be a long day. She didn't know those would be the last words anyone would ever hear her say. She was spotted once more that morning around 8:30 a.m. by a pipeline worker named Sean Taylor, who was checking meters to miles out. He waved. She waved back. Nothing strange, nothing urgent. He later told the sheriff she looked like she always did, serious but in control. By noon, the cattle had returned to the ranch. Alone, Maverick came back. No blood, no panic. Just tired, dust-covered, riderless. Sheriff Del Rey didn't take the call seriously at first. She probably just walked back. He told Hallie Whitmore, Lena's younger sister, or camped out. Happens all the time. But by sunset, there was no sign of her. No boot prints. No broken branches. No trail. No campfire. Just an abandoned thermos found near the southern canyon ledge, the lid unscrewed, still warm. That tan silence. The search lasted for days. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers, horses. They covered 30 miles of terrain. The terrain didn't cover them back, it gave up nothing. Sheriff Del Rey called it an unexplained disappearance. Locals called it everything from a cartel abduction to alien encounter. Hallie didn't say much, just cried and stayed inside the ranch house. Jake showed up drunk to one of the search parties, tried to punch a deputy, and was promptly escorted off the land. Eventually, everyone went back to their routines, and the desert did what deserts do best. It buried what it couldn't explain. The rig operator didn't scream when the drill locked up. He cursed, then blinked at the sparks. At 60 feet deep in a dry slice of desert outside Sage County, hitting resistance wasn't abnormal. Hitting metal was. Liam Denker, the shift foreman, approached the site with a clipboard and a heat headache. He expected another busted blade or buried pipe. What he found instead looked like the twisted underbelly of something long forgotten, oxidized steel. Not recent, with a burnt smell clinging to the sand. Within 2 hours, Westcore Energy had stopped all drilling and called in the county. What started as oil exploration turned into a crime scene. The desert around the site stood still, as if listening. Red caution tape fluttered in the sun like dying snakes. The earth yawned wide in a jagged gash, revealing the half-submerged remains of a horse trailer, collapsed inward but unmistakable. Its tires were rotted. The paint had all but peeled. One side had caved in entirely. A crushed, rusted ribcage of a secret. Sheriff Del Rey arrived before the forensics van. He stood near the edge of the pit and adjusted his hat, though the sun was already melting the horizon. His gut, the same gut that told him to close Lena Whitmore's case, had just dropped 10 pounds of guilt straight to his boots. The trailer had been sealed, hastily buried under years of wind-shifted sand and sun-baked silence. It took the crew for hours to extract it carefully, piece by piece, revealing the hollow echo of something that should never have been buried. Inside, they found bones, human, female, curled unnaturally in the back, half covered in what looked like shredded canvas and cracked leather. Her boots were still on, scuffed, faded. A small branding iron lay beside her, the handle warped. One boot had a single blonde hair twisted between the laces. There were no bullet holes, no blood, just time, decay, and the evidence of containment, like she'd been placed there. Maybe post-mortem, maybe not. For now, it didn't matter. What mattered was what it meant. Lena Whitmore hadn't run away. She hadn't gotten lost. She had never left Sage County. She was buried right here on her own damn land. The oil company wanted answers. The town wanted justice. But Del Rey, he wanted forgiveness. Jesus Christ, whispered Deputy Sal. You think it's her? Del Rey's lips stayed tight. He knelt near the edge of the trailer, his boots crunching against shattered glass. Inside, dust glinted like tiny ghosts in the fading light. I think we've been wrong for 8 years. The next morning, the news broke. Small towns don't hold secrets well, not when the oil boys are tweeting photos before the bodies, even cold. By 10 a.m., Hallie Whitmore stood outside the police station. Her eyes hidden behind cheap black sunglasses, her mouth trembling. I told y'all, she didn't just leave, she said to the press. She loved this land, she wouldn't have walked away. Jake Whitmore didn't show up. He was found passed out behind a bar in Pecos, reeking of sweat, gasoline, and stale regret. But the strangest reaction came from the townsfolk. No mourning, no candlelight vigils, just silence. Uneasy silence. Because Lena had been too proud, too loud, too complicated, and deep down, a few of them weren't all that surprised she ended up dead. Description: brief cinematic moment, the ranch sat empty. The corral gate creaked in the wind. Lena's old hat still hung on a nail near the barn. Dust coated everything. No cattle, no dogs, just the memory of bootsteps and the faint smell of leather and hay. The desert doesn't care who you were, it only remembers where you fell. Narration continued back at the crime scene. The forensics team logged evidence late into the night. The bones were fragile but well preserved. There were signs of blunt force trauma, a fractured skull. The body hadn't decomposed normally. The dry burial had almost mummified parts of it. They found scrapings on the trailer ceiling, desperate marks from fingernails. She may have been alive when they shut the door. That single detail would keep Del Rey up for the rest of his life. Chapter ending hook. Forward as the remains were zipped into a body bag and lifted into the coroner's van. Del Rey finally said her name aloud for the first time in years. Lena, no more theories. More rumors. It was time to talk to her ex-husband, because Jake Whitmore once said something after she vanished. Something weird, something off. She was already gone long before she left. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. His knuckles were busted again, and the porch of the trailer he called home creaked under his weight like it resented him. Jake Whitmore was the kind of man who used to turn heads. A cowboy hat tilted just right. A smirk that made girls nervous for the wrong reasons. That was 10 years ago. Now he looked like something left out in the sun, too long dried out, bitter and rusting from the inside. He lit a cigarette with a match scratched off the sole of his boot. That was when the sheriff's cruiser pulled into the yard. Jake's trailer sat off Route 78, leaning like it wanted to collapse, but hadn't been granted the mercy yet. A junked-out truck sat dead in the grass. Behind the shed, a wind chime made of beer caps clinked in the hot air. The place smelled like oil, sweat, and dogs. Sheriff Del Rey stepped out of the vehicle, slow like he knew he was walking into a cage. The sun cast long shadows behind him. Jake didn't stand. Just took another drag and squinted. "Well," Jake muttered, "it finally happened. You boys found her." Jake didn't flinch when he heard the news, didn't cry, didn't even pretend to be surprised. In fact, he smiled, thin and hollow. "She was a wildfire," he said. "You try and fence it in, you just end up burned." Back when they were married, Lena and Jake were the couple people watched through their rearview mirrors. He drank too much, she worked too hard. They'd scream loud enough to echo across the canyon, then show up to Sunday service like nothing happened. The fights were legendary, so were the reconciliations, but something snapped 2 years before she vanished. Jake had lost his job again, crashed a Bronco in Amarillo, broke 2 ribs, and took it out on Lena's inheritance. That land was hers. Her father's dying wish. She refused to sell it. Jake wanted out. She wanted roots. "I didn't kill her," he said, unprompted. "I just couldn't hold her anymore." Del Rey sat down across from him, notepad closed. Body tense. She had a cracked skull. "Jake, Shaneth." "Yeah," Jake muttered, voice low. "I reckon she did." "You think I did it?" Jake asked. "After all this time?" "I think I've got bones in a trailer, buried in your ex-wife's pasture," Del Rey said, calm but sharp. "And I think you told Hallie she was already gone, long before she left." Jake flicked the cigarette butt into the dirt. "That ain't what I meant. You ever seen someone vanish inside their own skin?" That was Lena near the end. Always looking over her shoulder, locking doors twice, not sleeping, whispering names I'd never heard. "What names?" He hesitated. Then looked away, didn't ask. "She had ghosts. And not all of 'em were mine." Narration continued. Del Rey left with more questions than answers. Jake had no clean alibi, but no direct evidence pinned him either. Just attitude, silence, and that gnawing, simmering resentment that made men dangerous. He wasn't dumb enough to bury her in her own field, Del Rey thought, but he might have been angry enough to help someone who would. Later that night, Jake stood outside his trailer, drunk, staring out at the stars. He whispered her name like it still had teeth. "Lena." Then he smashed the whiskey bottle against the porch post. Description: cinematic closing in the distance. Thunder rolled over the canyon, a rare storm building in July. The wind picked up, rustling dead weeds. The trailer groaned, and inside, on the far wall near a broken mirror, a photograph still hung, the two of them on horseback, years ago. Her hand on his thigh, his arm wrapped too tightly around her waist. Both of them smiling. Both of them pretending. The next morning, Del Rey got a call from forensics. The metal branding iron found in the trailer. It wasn't Lena's brand, it belonged to someone else. Someone still living just down the ridge. Sheriff Dale Del Rey wasn't the type to believe in ghosts. But as he sat alone in his office that night, flipping through Lena Whitmore's old case file, he started to feel like one was standing just behind his shoulder. The bones in the trailer had been confirmed. DNA was a match. The death was ruled a homicide. The branding iron wasn't from her ranch, it belonged to someone else, someone close. But what rattled him more than the evidence was the memory. A memory he had no business remembering. It had been 8 years, but Dale still remembered the way Lena looked that night, leaning against his cruiser outside the bar on County Road 6, boots scuffed, jaw clenched, a bruise blooming across her collarbone. She came to me, he whispered to no one, and I turned her away. Lena had filed no report. Said it was an accident. Said Jake had got too drunk. Dale had seen the truth in her eyes, the storm of pride, pain, and something else, fear. She told him it was fine, that she'd handle it, that she wasn't some helpless girl. And then, just before she walked away, she kissed him. It wasn't romantic, it was broken, breathless. A plea maybe, a punishment. A goodbye he never told anyone, not even his wife. Description: 20%. The sheriff's office felt smaller tonight. The light above his desk buzzed faintly. Outside, wind scraped sand against the windows like nails across glass. The entire town felt like it was bracing for something. In the corner of the room sat a metal evidence box, newly sealed. Inside, Lena's belt buckle. A boot. That branding iron. Dale couldn't look at it for long. He finally called Deputy Sal. You remember when Lena came in, 8 years back? Which time? Sal asked, too quickly. The last time, late, bruised up, didn't file. Yeah, I remember thinking. We should have done more. We didn't, Dale said. I didn't. There was a pause on the line. Then Sal asked quietly, what do you want to do now? Dale lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in years. Find out who the hell that branding iron belongs to, and reopen every lie I let walk out my door. Narration continued. He opened his bottom drawer, something he hadn't done since Lena vanished. Inside was a torn page from her journal. Mailed anonymously the year after her disappearance. It had been too vague to use back then, but now, read, he won't let me speak. Not about Jake, not about that night. He said if I breathe a word, he'll take the land. Take me. No one listens anyway, not even him. Delray had always wondered who him was. Now he had a list. The branding iron was traced the next morning. Stamped with a broken R, belonged to Reverend Calvin Grady, the town's preacher. The man who always said Lena was dangerous. And he was right. She was dangerous. Two men, with something to hide, Hallie Whitmore, hadn't stepped foot on the family ranch since the search parties stopped showing up. She told people it was grief, told herself it was trauma. But, in truth, it was fear that the dirt out there still remembered her, that the wind would whisper back what she'd tried so hard to forget. When she got the call that Lena's body had been found, she didn't cry. She sat in the kitchen, lights off, staring at the baby monitor like it could somehow rewind time. Then she quietly threw up in the sink. The house was too quiet. Her kids were down for their naps. Outside, the Texas heat was unbearable, pressing against the windows like a silent threat. The television hummed in the background, muted, frozen on a grainy still of the crime scene. A trailer, a desert ridge, a name, Lena Whitmore. The name landed like a bullet. She drove out to the ranch. That night, just after midnight. No headlights, just instinct and regret guiding her down the winding dirt roads. It was all still there. The barn, the tool shed, the porch swing that used to creak when the wind got hungry. But everything was older now, tired, haunted. She sat down on the steps of the house, wrapped her arms around her knees, and looked at the stars. Lena had always loved the stars, she used to say. That's the only place we don't owe anyone anything. Hallie whispered to the night. I told you to leave it alone. Because Lena had come to her just 3 nights before she vanished. Said she was ready to tell the truth. Said she was going to file a report. Said she wasn't scared anymore, but Hallie had been terrified. Lena, I'm done protecting people who don't deserve it. Hallie, you don't know what you're starting. Lena, he touched me. Hallie, you think I'm gonna keep quiet for your sake? Hallie, panicked. If you do this, you'll ruin everything. You'll burn the whole damn family down. Lena, voice calm, resolved, then let it burn. Hallie had begged her to wait. Just wait. Lena had walked out of her house and never came back. Now she was in a body bag, pulled from a rusted trailer like some forgotten livestock, and Hallie's Silence was a noose she'd tied herself. Present-day dialogue. Sheriff Del Rey showed up at her door the next morning, hat in hand, eyes tired. "Can I come in?" She nodded. He stood awkwardly in her kitchen, looking around like the truth might be hiding in the curtains. "I need to ask about something," Lena said, right before she disappeared. Hallie kept her hands steady, poured coffee, added sugar, stirred. "She said she was scared," Del Rey continued. "Said someone was watching her. You two were close. Did she tell you anything about that?" Hallie didn't flinch. She'd practiced this. "No," she said softly. "She didn't tell me much. She kept things in. She had a journal. I never saw it. She mentioned a Reverend Grady. You know anything about that?" Hallie's voice wavered, but just slightly. "Enough to pass for grief. He always creeped her out. That's all I know." Del Rey studied her. Something in his jaw ticked, but he nodded, thanked her, and left. Narration continued. She waited until his truck disappeared down the road before she went upstairs. In the back of her closet, hidden behind winter coats and broken photo frames, was a box. Inside the box was Lena's journal, and inside that journal was the real reason Lena was going to the sheriff. Hallie ran her fingers over the ink, smeared in places by time or tears. One entry was underlined. "I told Hallie. She said it would destroy us, but what about what he did to me? I won't carry this alone anymore." Hallie closed the journal, locked the box, shoved it back into the darkness. Description. Cinematic moment. She walked outside, barefoot, to the edge of the yard. The grass crackled beneath her feet. In the distance, storm clouds rolled over the horizon like a slow judgment. She stood in the wind, eyes closed, whispering a prayer she no longer believed in. Back inside the box, beneath the journal, was a photograph, faded, torn dot to young girls on horseback, a man standing between them, hand on Lena's shoulder, his face barely visible in shadow, but the initials on his belt buckle were unmistakable. C.G. Calvin Grady. Dot and Hallie had never thrown it away. The desert doesn't lie. That's what forensic investigator Amy Tran told Sheriff Del Rey as she stood over the excavation site, wind whipping at her clipboard, dust biting her eyes. They'd just finished scanning the soil around the buried trailer, mapping layers like a geological time capsule. What they found wasn't just a burial, it was a burial, and an exit. "There are two sets of tire impressions," she said, voice flat. Del Rey raised an eyebrow. "Two vehicles?" She nodded. One heavy, likely the truck that hauled the trailer, the other, lighter, off-road treads, unique pattern. "We ran it." She flipped the clipboard around. Matched to a 1972 Ford Bronco, registered 8 years ago, to Evan Holt. Evan Holt lived half a mile west of Lena's ranch, a loner, ranch hand-turned dog rescuer. Drove an old pickup, kept to himself, fed strays, and never showed up to church, which, in Sage County, was its own kind of sin. The Ford Bronco in question. Long gone, scrapped for parts a few years back. But Amy had the paperwork, signed and dated. And now, his name was on the board. Del Rey remembered Evan vaguely. He'd grown up quiet, always hovering around Lena back in high school, carried her books, fixed her truck, stood too close when they talked. Most folks thought it was harmless, puppy love, unrequited, forgotten, but Lena had once told Hallie something different, that Evan gave her the creeps. Said he'd show up at her house uninvited. Said she once caught him watching her ride out, binoculars in hand. Nobody listened. Because Evan was just Evan. Quiet, helpful, lonely Evan. Until now, Del Rey knocked on Evan's door late in the afternoon. Evan answered wearing gloves and a shirt covered in dog hair. His eyes were pale, watery, darting, tired. "Sheriff," he said. "Was wondering when you'd show. You got time to talk?" Evan stepped aside. "Only thing, I got plenty of inside." The place was sterile, neat, almost obsessively clean. A dozen rescue dogs paced in kennels, tails low. The house smelled like bleach and kibble. On the wall, a photo of Evan holding a puppy, and beside it, one of Lena from the county fair, smiling, unaware. Del Rey pointed at it. "That yours?" "Yeah," Evan said softly. She gave it to me, years ago. You and Lena close. Evan's lips twitched. We had moments. What kind of moments? Evan turned away. She was kind to me. That's all. But you were near her land the day she disappeared. You ever drive that Bronco out past the canyon? Long time ago, before the fire. What fire? Evan's mouth tightened. Had to get rid of some things. Narration continued. Del Rey left the house cold in his gut. Evan hadn't confessed, but he hadn't denied anything either. And the fact that he still had a framed photo of Lena on his wall, 8 years later, said more than he realized. Amy Tran ran luminol in Evan's garage, found faint traces of blood near the drain. Too degraded to test, too deliberate to ignore. Description. Cinematic closing moment later that night. Evan sat alone in his kitchen. He opened an old shoebox, slid out a faded letter in Lena's handwriting. You don't get to follow me anymore, please stop. He read it over and over, like it was scripture, then lit a match and watched it burn in the sink. The smoke curled upward, thin, bitter, and final. Chapter ending hook. Amy called Del Rey at 1:17 a.m. You're not gonna like this, she said. I pulled up the trailer's VIN number. It was reported stolen 3 weeks before Lena disappeared. Stolen from where? She paused. Reverend Grady's youth ranch. Evan Holt had lived on his inherited patch of land since the age of 17. Never left, never married, never made much noise. In Sage County, people like that blended into the background, polite, unremarkable, always around, never noticed. But now he was noticed. After 8 years of silence, Evan Holt had become a person of interest. The inside of Evan's home was a picture of control. Not just clean, surgically clean, cabinets labeled, drawers organized by category. His TV still had the plastic seal on the screen. There was no clutter, except in one locked back room. When forensics opened it, they found the opposite of ordered. Photos. Dozens of them, some framed, some taped to the walls. All of Lena. Lena riding her horse. Lena drinking from a stream. Lena, asleep on a porch swing, taken from a distance, through a lens. Each photo was dated, numbered. Some were circled, others crossed out. Evan had been obsessed with Lena since they were teenagers. He followed her, not always in person, but always with his camera. She had smiled at him once in 11th grade. He had written about it in a leather-bound journal. That smile was mine. No one else saw it. His life revolved around watching her live hers. When she got married to Jake, he wrote in all caps, "Mistake, he doesn't see her." He built a shed in his backyard with no windows and soundproof insulation. Inside were recordings. From a drone, from hidden cameras. Most were poor quality, but one was crystal clear. Lena, mid-argument with Jake, screaming, "I will not be afraid of you." And then, just faintly in the background, Evan's voice. "Everything's gonna be okay now." When Del Rey brought Evan in for questioning, he started quiet, almost childlike. "You followed her," Del Rey said. "You watched her for years." "I protected her," Evan whispered. "You don't understand, she needed me, she needed space. You took her privacy, her peace. You took photos of her sleeping. I never touched her, but you were there." Evan looked down. "Yes, did you help move the trailer?" Evan blinked. "It was already packed. I just helped with the dirt." Del Rey stiffened. "Who packed it?" Evan looked up slowly. "She asked me to keep her safe. I did." Narration continued. That statement turned the room cold, because either Evan was delusional, or someone else had put Lena in that trailer, and Evan had helped hide the body under the belief that he was protecting her. But from who? And why was the trailer stolen from Reverend Grady's youth camp, not Evan's land? It wasn't adding up. Description: cinematic moment. Del Rey watched the footage again that night, the recording Evan had stashed, in one frame. Lena rides away from the house. In another, Jake is throwing a shovel. And in one grainy shot, unmistakable, Reverend Calvin Grady is seen walking toward Lena's pasture, wearing a clerical collar, and carrying a branding iron. Chapter ending hook. Evan may have stalked her, but someone else had touched her. And the branding iron, the one found buried beside her body, didn't match Evan's story at all. It belonged to the church. The night before Lena Whitmore vanished, there was a fire along the east fence line. A small one, enough to scorch some brush, maybe singe a post or two. The wind took care of the rest. But she saw it as a message, a warning. It wasn't the first dot. Lena had been spiraling for weeks. Sleep came in fits. She carried her father's old revolver in her truck and checked locks twice before bed. Jake was back in town, stirring up trouble at bars, spitting bitter words into the ears of anyone who'd listen. And Evan was still around, always around, watching, but none of that scared her the way Reverend Grady did. She had gone to him once, for help, for comfort. Back when Jake first hit her, the Reverend had taken her into his office, closed the door, and placed a hand too low on her back. He told her, sometimes, God sends trials to test your obedience. She never went back, but he kept showing up. That evening, Lena stood near the back pasture, wind rustling her shirt, the last bits of sun painting her in red and gold. Smoke from the brush fire still curled on the horizon. She saw a figure walking toward her from the church path. Black shirt, white collar, Grady, her hand tightened around the branding iron she had brought to mark calves, the same one later found beside her body. She didn't want to brand anything tonight. She wanted answers, and if necessary, a weapon. Grady, smiling to Isaly, "You're not an easy woman to catch alone, Lena. Lena, cold. Stop walking, toward me, Grady, raising his hands, peace. I only came to talk. Lena, you burned my fence. Grady. I think you did that yourself. To get attention, that's what women like you do. Lena, stepping closer. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I'm going to the sheriff. I'm going to the press. I'll tell them everything. Grady, voice flattening. You think they'll believe you, over me, Lena? I don't need them to believe me. I need them to dig. A long pause. Grady, you'll ruin people. Lena, they're already ruined. Narration continued. He left after that, silent and smiling, as if nothing had happened. But Lena stood there a long time, branding iron in hand, eyes scanning the shadows like something might leap out of them. She didn't ride back to the house until the moon was high. She packed a bag, grabbed her father's revolver, wrote a note she never got to deliver, and then she left. She headed toward the far pasture, planning to move the calves, clear her head. Maybe sleep under the stars, the only place she ever felt safe, but someone was already waiting for her near the ridge. Description: cinematic. Flashback momenta. Flashlight clicked on in the dark. A whisper: don't scream. Lena turned, heart thudding. The revolver was too far. She reached for the branding iron. A gloved hand gripped her wrist. Another covered her mouth. Footsteps, rustling, duct tape, darkness. Then nothing. Flash forward, present back in the present. Sheriff Del Rey paces in front of a whiteboard littered with photos. Lena, Jake, Evan, Reverend Grady, Hallie in the center. The trailer he circles. Grady's name in red. Time to knock on the church door, he says, because the branding iron, buried with Lena. It wasn't used on calves, it was a relic, a ceremonial piece, and it belonged in Grady's private collection. The chapel smelled like lemon oil, dust, and lies. Sheriff Del Rey stood just inside the sanctuary, hat in hand, boots echoing against the wooden floor. The morning sun slanted through the stained glass like a quiet accusation. Painting the pews in red and gold, Reverend Calvin Grady sat near the altar. Suit pressed, collar stiff, hands folded like he'd been expecting the law to walk through those doors his whole life. The chapel was empty, but nothing about it felt quiet. The air hummed with old secrets, with hymns sung to cover up sins. The cross behind the pulpit cast a long shadow. A baptismal bowl sat filled, untouched. Still as glass. Del Rey walked up the center aisle like it was Judgment Day. Reverend, he said, voice low. Sheriff, Grady replied, smooth as honey, we need to talk. Somewhere private. Grady gestured calmly. You're already in God's house. What could be more private? Del Rey didn't smile. He sat in the first pew, pulling out a folder, inside photos, burned fragments, handwritten journal entries, a charred piece of leather from Lena's old bag. He laid them out like cards in a game. Neither man wanted to play. You recognize this? Del Rey asked, pointing to the melted brass tag. The remains of a ceremonial branding iron. Grady nodded. It went missing years ago. Thought it was stolen by some local boys. It was found beside Lena Whitmore's body. Grady didn't flinch. I'm not surprised. What's that supposed to mean? Del Rey asked. She was unstable, Grady said, troubled, violent. You know that, you all knew, no, Reverend. What I know is she came to you for help, and she left more afraid than when she arrived. Grady's eyes narrowed. Accused a lot of men of things they didn't do. Got caught in her own imagination. Funny how your name showed up in her private journal. She wrote plenty of things in that journal. Doesn't mean they were true. Del Rey leaned forward. She said you touched her. Grady's jaw clenched. He spoke slowly. She misunderstood my concern for something else. She also wrote you threatened her. Said you'd bury her where the cows wouldn't find her. Grady chuckled, quiet, ugly. That sounds like something she'd write. Always theatrical. Del Rey stood. If you're not guilty, Reverend, why do you sound so calm? Grady looked up at him, smile gone. Because God already judged her. I'm just cleaning up what's left. Narration continued. Del Rey wanted to hit him. For the first time in 28 years of wearing the badge, he felt violence simmer just beneath his ribs. But instead, he left. He walked out into the morning light and made one phone call. To the DA, I want a warrant for the Reverend's house. Tonight? Cinematic description. Later that night, the raid began at 9:12 p.m. Officers moved through the chapel's private residence. Careful, steady, guns drawn. In the basement, beneath a false panel, they found a box. Inside, women's belongings, a scarf, a lipstick, Lena's ring, and beneath them, a VHS tape, labeled Whitmore. July 15, 17, they didn't press play, they didn't need to. Hallie Whitmore sat at her kitchen table, hands trembling around a chipped coffee mug. The news had just broken. Reverend Calvin Grady, arrested. Evidence seized, suspected in the murder of her sister. But Hallie wasn't relieved. She was haunted, because she knew something the police didn't. She knew Grady didn't act alone. It had started long before Lena disappeared. Back when Jake had lost control, and Lena started leaning on people she shouldn't have. Hallie knew about the late-night drives to Grady's chapel. The secret meetings. The way Lena looked after, shaken, paranoid, broken. She hadn't just been hurt by one man, she had been cornered by three. Jake, who beat her, Evan, who watched her, and Grady, who manipulated her, and Hallie. Hallie had let it happen, because the truth was uglier than anyone knew. Hallie and Grady had been lovers. It started with prayer circles and counseling sessions. It ended with motel rooms and promises. Whispered between scripture. Grady had told her Lena was dangerous, unstable, promiscuous, a threat to her marriage, and Hallie lost, exhausted, desperate to feel seen, had believed him, until Lena came to her with the truth. I'm going to the sheriff, she'd said, and Hallie, terrified of losing her husband, her town, her place in Grady's quiet kingdom, had made a call to Jake. The night Lena vanished, Hallie sat by the window. Phone pressed to her ear, watching the desert. I think she's finally going to do it, she whispered. Jake's voice on the other end, slurred, angry, hollow. Take care of it. A long pause. Hallie said nothing. She didn't ask what that meant. She never called back. Hallie walked into Sheriff Del Rey's office just after sunrise. I want to make a statement, she said. He looked up slowly. About what? About Lena. About Jake. About Reverend Grady. Del Rey's face darkened. Go on. Hallie sat down, spine straight, eyes wet but steady. They didn't act alone. Lena was going to expose all of them. Jake hit her. Grady tried to control her, and Evan just watched like a damn vulture. But me, I was the worst of all. Del Rey said nothing. Hallie continued. I called Jake the night she disappeared. I told him Lena was leaving. I told him everything. She broke down then, not a sob, something quieter, a breath shattered in half. I just wanted it to stop. Narration continued. Del Rey didn't arrest her, not right away. He asked for the phone records, the motel logs. Hallie gave them everything. She signed the journal pages, turned over her burner phone. She even brought in the one thing no one had seen before. Lena's final voicemail, cinematic playback moment, her voice, shaky but strong. Hallie, I know you don't believe me. I know you think I'm trying to ruin everything, but he's not who you think he is. Grady has photos, he has things. And if anything happens to me, you tell the sheriff. You tell him to dig. This land isn't holy, it's a graveyard. Click. Description. Visual closure. Hallie watched the sun rise from the front porch of the ranch. For the first time in 8 years. The land felt quiet. Still, a new fence was going up. The burned field had been cleared. Cattle grazed again. But the ghosts weren't gone. They just had names now. The desert never forgets. Not the blood, not the secrets. Not the names, carved into the wind by whispers and wildfire. 8 years after, Lena Whitmore's body was pulled from a sun-baked trailer. The town of Sage County still hadn't healed. Sure, the chapel had closed, the bar had changed names, and the land was fenced tighter than ever. But Lena was everywhere. Her story had gone viral. True crime documentaries, podcast episodes, YouTube explainers, dissecting every lie, every silence. People painted her as a fighter, a symbol, a tragedy. But Hallie didn't want a symbol. She wanted a sister. Hallie returned on a Wednesday, not for redemption, not for forgiveness. She came to stand on the ridge, the place where Lena was buried, where the wind still carried the scent of rust and sage, where a plaque now sat. Lena Mae Whitmore, 1989 to 2017. She did not go quietly. The sun was high. No sound but cicadas. No footprints in the sand but hers. Flashback narration. The documentary had gotten most things right. Evan Holt had confessed to helping bury Lena, manipulated, delusional, desperate to be useful to someone who never saw him. Grady died in federal custody. Heart attack, some said. Poison, others whispered. No one cried. Jake's suicide note was 1 line long. She never kept her mouth shut. But what the film missed was Hallie. No one knew she had lied in court about the second voicemail. The one she deleted. The one that said, Hallie, it's okay, I forgive you, you just didn't know how deep it went. Dialogue to 20%. Present-day Sheriff Del Rey met Hallie on the ridge. He looked older, grayer, but his voice was the same, tired, steady, low. You back for good? No, Hallie said. Just long enough to tell her, I'm sorry, she'd forgive you. I'm not sure I would. A pause. Del Rey handed her something small, tarnished, warm from his pocket. Lena's belt buckle. We recovered it. From evidence, he said. Didn't feel right leaving it boxed. Hallie held it like it still pulsed with heat. Like it still mattered. She was fire, she whispered. She was a fuse, Del Rey replied. We just never asked what she was burning to escape from. Narration continued. That night, Hallie burned every article, every documentary file, every clipped-out headline she'd saved like scars. She left Sage County the next morning, and never looked back. But people still talk. They say sometimes, on the ridge at sunset, you can hear hooves, not wind, and a girl's voice, carried soft, don't forget me. Sage County didn't die when Lena did, it just molted, shed its skin, became something else. The church still stands, boarded, now tagged with a single word in red spray paint, unholy. The pasture grew over, new cattle, new owner. The sheriff retired, bought a boat he never sailed. Moved to Houston, where no one asked about desert bones or dead sisters or crooked preachers, but the people. They stayed, and they never said her name again. At the corner cafe, old men sip coffee and talk about rain that never comes. At the post office, flyers go up for church bake sales. At the new chapel, 2 towns over, at the school, a little girl reads from a book about women who changed the world. She picks Lena Whitmore. No one corrects her, no one applauds. No one applauds, just silence. The kind that cuts deep. I remember her laugh, a former classmate says during an interview. But mostly, I remember how people looked away. You know, when she got loud, when she got bruised, when she talked too much, she was always asking questions. Always. Digging a pause. We all heard her. We just didn't want to hear her. Narration continued. There were more victims. 3 other women came forward after the trial. Names never released. One worked at the youth camp. One was a Sunday school teacher. One had moved across the country and thought she'd imagined it. None of them testified. Not because they were lying, because they were tired, and in small towns. Tired is often enough to keep your mouth shut. Final flashback, the tape Hallie never gave the police in a box under Hallie's bed, never turned in, never burned, was one last cassette, Lena's voice, recorded late at night, tired, barely audible over the wind. I don't care if they kill me. I don't care if nobody believes me. I just want the truth somewhere. Even if it's buried, let the sand find it. Let the cattle step on it. Let the oil drills hit it. But let it be there. Final image, description and, somewhere, in that same desert, a new oil company runs a deeper drill, miles from the original site. The machine hits something hard. They stop. Pull up a fragment, not metal, not bone, a cassette. Lena's name, etched faintly into the plastic.